Again, this session is the Repository Crisis Scorecards, an assessment of organizational resiliency to the unexpected. You can see all of our co-organizers and also co-authors for the work. We have some of them here in the room. I'm quite thankful to all of you for helping out with this. And moving along, this is our roadmap. We're actually going to take a quick detour to talk about this data resiliency thematic track that has sort of popped up as session organizers started talking to each other, and it turns out there wasn't a lot of overlap in what people were proposing sessions on. Obviously, with the current administration and the way things are going right now, this is something very near and dear to our hearts, partially because this is something very near and dear to our bellies and allowing ourselves to feed ourselves. So if data repositories go away, a lot of us will be unemployed. Also, after we take that last detour, we will go back to the repository crisis scorecards, and after that, after a quick introduction, overview of that, we will go into breakout groups to hopefully either answer questions around the scorecards or discuss results, ways that we can improve these scorecards. And so to take our quick detour into the data resiliency thematic track, I was trying to come up with a good definition for data resiliency, and honestly, nothing I came up with really worked for me at the time. But one of the thoughts I had while I was trying to figure out something short and sweet that you can put on a sticker was that the world has changed. We can no longer assume that the siloed monorepositories that we've sort of been working with so far, that have been given sustained funding for years, decades, since the birth of, say, NSF or NASA or NOAA, who have you, is the current paradigm. We've seen CDAC at Columbia lose their funding over a political spat. It could happen to any of us next. So for the commercial world, they have multi-site replication. Say if you have your data replicated across US East and US West, if a Hurricane Helene happens to go up and help hit the Beltway, hit Virginia, the data centers there, you can fail over to US West. That is not necessarily true of a lot of our repositories right now. We may have very centralized infrastructure at one data center. We may not have MOUs, memorandums of understanding with other repositories, data centers, people that are willing to share space and say, hey, if something happens, we can have your back for a little while. How can we do these things that are common in the commercial world? How can we bring these insights over to the scientific academic realm? I know this is hard because usually what happens is the big cloud providers or what have you decide to poach us at 2 or 3 times our rates, and we never come back to academia. It's hard once you get used to a nice, cushy lifestyle. So this is just a very incomplete figure. I actually wanted it to look a little bit more colorful, but these are some of the resources that exist today. And I put an incomplete web of data sources, endpoints, and data types with some associated data resiliency works. I definitely don't think this is everything and everything. I know there are other people that are thinking about these things, that are working on similar tools, other publications that have already been put out. But this is what I could pull together in the hour and a half this morning while our very good keynote speakers were talking. So this is what you get. And if there's anything you'd like to suggest, I would greatly appreciate it if you all put it in the notes or come and talk to me later. The more that we collaborate and work together, as we are wont to do, the stronger we'll be and the better we will be off. So just to go over the different sessions, there are 10 sessions, or a little over 20% of the sessions this week are dealing with data resiliency in some way, and I can actually think of a few more that, after looking at the schedule, should probably be on here, but I didn't get a chance to ask their organizers first. Today we have the repository crisis scorecards, followed by the principles for the development and creation of semantic resources in earth science. They're talking about preserving their ontologies, web servers, tools, structured vocabulary servers. Where do they go if, say, NASA was to stop funding the GCMD keywords? Is there another place for it to go? There is an international consortium that I can't remember the acronym off the top of my head, but as far as I could determine, it's still being funded and hosted by NASA resources. Similarly, for oceanography, NOC, and the National Oceanography Center in the UK hosts a bunch of vocabulary servers, but if the UK was to pull out of that, what is the fallback plan for there? So that's what they're talking about. Nothing in the afternoon. On Wednesday, we have case studies of transitioning datasets from specialist to generalist repositories. I know we're all quite proud of the work that we do with our specialist repositories, but there are some cases where it might make sense to move datasets to a generalist repository. Maybe there are budget cuts, maybe you've been told to sundown something, maybe all of your researchers are just putting everything on Zenodo or Figshare anyway, and if you can't get them to keep submitting to you, it's time to actually go to where your users are. And how can we do a better job of bringing specialist services to these generalist repositories? And that is a pair with the archive your first or second data set, where we will actually go through an in-depth example of migrating a data set into Zenodo and trying to capture as much of the ISO 19115, ISO 19139 metadata, how we decided to crosswalk and map those things over. Also, at the same time as the archive your first or second data set, we have CDF, the Council of Data Facilities, where they have a little bit of a grab bag session, but they are talking about data resiliency and what they can do as a community of data facilities. What does this mean to them? This is followed up by 2 p.m. What role should civil society play in climate and environmental data stewardship? Talking about citizen archivists, as I like to put it, an analog to citizen scientists. So we have these citizen archivists that are trying to go out and grab data. They may be librarians or specialists in data preservations in other fields, but how can we translate our specific geospatial, geoscience data to work with these other groups? In citizen archivists that are coming at us from, say, the Data Rescue Project, EDGI, other places, or even further abroad. On Thursday, we have data replication and repository succession, sustaining and preserving data for the long term. I think this is case studies, talking just about how do we maintain our data for the long term. This will be paired with the 4 p.m. session of research data management systems, a hands-on session on how to replicate data across similar systems. We will have 2 examples of Metacat and ERDAP and how to do copy data, say, from one of these instances to another one of the same instances. not quite Metacat to ERDAP, but Metacat to Metacat and ERDAP to ERDAP. We will also have at 11 a.m. consistent reproducible workflows for geospatial stewardship that is moving data to, shoot, I forgot off the top of my head. But if you look at the schedule, the description will say it very nicely. And at 2 p.m., we will have the unconference session. Steve, should I mention anything about it now? There will be a surprise NASM, National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine mini workshop about data preservation. This came up in the last week after the recent workshops they've been holding about Earth observations. They've been holding it across the US. The atmospheric one was at NCAR hybrid. Yeah, I think it'll be a very engaging session. I would encourage you all to go there. Oh shoot, I forgot to refresh this, but there is a Friday session, and that will be sort of the capstone session to talk about all these topics that I've just brought up this week. I will try to take good notes after the sessions, in some cases, since I'm speaking in, I think, half of them, and try to, we can talk about maybe what data resiliency means. What is a good definition? How can we do this better further on? What are the insights we've gathered? And maybe make a little bit of, not quite a white paper, but a working report after this conference. And with that out of the way, we are going to the repository crisis stress tests, scorecards. When I first started shopping around this idea, people seemed to like the scorecards idea initially. And part of the idea came from the 2008-2009 financial crash. But they've been doing this earlier than that, where the Federal Reserve develops these stress test scenarios, sort of a thought experiment where you ask yourself, okay, let's say these conditions happen. How will your bank respond to the home property mortgage market going kaput? And so this is actually one of the diagrams that they have on the Federal Reserve. So I just copied it from there. And at the bottom, you have our citation and how to get to it. And so borrowing straight from that idea and borrowing from previous work in the What About Model Data, RCN, we came up with this idea of, okay, let's say that your repository is exposed to different stressors. What do you do about that? Are you able to handle suddenly being defunded, or a wildfire or a hurricane coming through and hitting your data center? Is your data still protected? Do you have copies of your data, say, in other places that you can reconstitute your services later? Or is everything SOL after a wildfire hits? And so this is what it looks like on Zenodo. The repository crisis scorecards. Some people might think of it as a self-help tool. Some people might think of it as a community survey. The answer is really, it's sort of what you want it to be. I personally, and I think a number of, say, open data scholars would love to have, say, a data set that we could look at over time, and even, say, track the metrics of how we are doing as a community and be able to say we are getting more resilient over time. But we also understand there are concerns about that, around that. In an age of flat budgets to budgets that are being clawed back, having a very subjective quantitative number attached to every scorecard makes it very easy to say we are going to cut the bottom 10% of repositories, regardless of their subject matter or what they're holding or uniqueness. We just don't need to pay for underperformers. And so we understand there are problems there, and we will talk about data privacy and data usage concerns in the next slide. But this repository crisis scorecards is very operationally focused. There is a similar tool called, developed by the NDSA, the Levels of Digital Preservation, which was pointed out to me after the fact that we created this, which is very similar and very helpful to think about. But at the same time, they're talking specifically about digital preservation, and they're not talking about physical sample preservation. And so there is still work to be done to harmonize the repository crisis scorecards with digital preservation, but also to think better about physical sample preservation, whether they're ice cores that'll melt away without constant refrigeration, or rocks, or DNA, or whatever else that you have. There's still a lot of work to be done. And it's very much focused on flying the plane during a crisis. There's a story about if you're a pilot and your plane is having a problem in the air, there's a checklist for everything, and the first thing on that checklist says, fly the damn plane. Doesn't matter if you're looking at all your gauges and trying to pull levers and buttons, don't worry about that. First, fly the plane so you can do all the other steps next. And so some of these, all the questions and prompts should hopefully lead you to a conversation where you can think about, can we still do data curation, data serving, data archiving? Can we still fulfill our core mission of being a data repository that people can put data into and get data out of? And then we can think about, we need to copy our data to someplace across the US in a different region or another country or somewhere else. I'll say that the repository crisis scorecards is very much a quantitative tool for subjective observations. I've had a few people fill it out right now, some people in the same repository, and the scores that I got back were not wildly different, but not very close either. And so, you could query your whole team and ask them to fill this out today, and you could get very wildly scores, which are very wildly different perceptions of how your repository is doing. And that may be because somebody is a backend developer and they know exactly how much data is being held and when the hard drives were last bought and what the error rates are happening, and other people that are working on the front end or working on metadata. And so everybody has their different niches. They'll give you different answers, and hopefully that leads to a conversation between everybody in your group that can try to say, why are our scores so different? And ideally, I think you do it multiple times per project, per person, periodically, maybe yearly or something. And you can track how you're doing over time. You can think of it as a tool for a longitudinal survey and just see, okay, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? What is going on? And so privacy and data usage, this is not self-reporting. I don't get any information back from this. The cluster does not get any information back from this. So you could download it as a spreadsheet or a PDF or print it out and fill it out by hand. And I will never know, we will never know what your scores are. That said, we've tried to minimize any personal information collection, so we don't know exactly who filled it out. Obviously, if you're having a discussion as a group about your scores, that kind of lets you know who came up with what score. But for, say, a larger community survey analysis, we don't want to hold anyone's names or other personally identifiable information that will allow us to uniquely pick out who you are. We've gone back and forth about knowing which repository and sometimes which project. If you can think of something like NCEI, they hold a lot of data from a lot of different projects, and there are very few people that probably know everything about every project. So one project in NCEI could be doing a lot better than another project in NCEI. We have that sort of distinction as well. But honestly, we've only had 3 responses so far that I've seen. And so one of the goals is to hopefully get people to fill this out while they're in this session and then give us back the scores, and we can try to produce something of more value follow-up for this community and for others. We only plan to do aggregate analysis. I mean, looking in depth into someone's subjective opinions about how they're doing is kind of doomed to fail. I don't feel good doing that. But looking at, say, how all of us are doing in one section or other as an aggregate number, I think could reveal some wider trends in the community. We do not intend to share anyone's submitted scorecards without prior approval from them. Again, we have 3 scorecards that are currently filled out, and I asked those people before we even did the first release if they could help by submitting their scorecards, and that I would like to use them as an example to show people that this is how you fill it out, and hopefully it works out for you. And they said yes. And those are the only examples I really intend to show to anyone ever, unless we have a very major revision that changes things around. And then I'll go around and ask for more consent. And then what else would you like to see? I don't claim to be a social scientist or be very good at knowing what concerns there are. But if there is something that you'd like to talk about, something to be blocked, then by all means, throw it at me. And we have a feedback form. So people can click on the slides. You'll see the link to that feedback form in many places. Please submit your scores through there. So talking about the scorecards, there are 3 parts to it. There is the pre-scorecards worksheet. There's an inventory of sort of what are you doing in your repository? Do you know how much data, metadata you're holding? How big are your pipes? For digital data, like how fast could you move data out if there was a hurricane coming? And if you have a very small pipe, then what do you prioritize to move out first? Those would be your irreplaceable data sets. It goes on and on, but this worksheet is intended to make answering the follow-up questions easier. It's not mandatory that you need to fill this out. I generally don't think I would look at them if I was looking at the scores, but if you find it helpful, it may get you in the right state of mind for answering the scorecards. These answers may be unique for everybody that's doing it in time and space. And then we move on to the repository resilience scorecard. This is sort of the first thing that was developed, and then the worksheet came after it, along with the second scorecard. They are operation-driven questions. They are hopefully directly actionable prompts. So if you find that you only have 1 copy of the data physically at your location, then maybe you'll go out and make a second copy elsewhere. We also have current and possible crises that could affect repositories on the far right side under scenarios. There are 4 scenarios right now. It could be a natural disaster about to hit, your repository being defunded, some sort of cyber attack, denial of service, whether from the outside or from within, or loss of technical expertise critical to running the repository, which is a very polite euphemism, technical euphemism. And the scorecard is intended to be filled out quickly. It's not meant for you to agonize and really think too hard about it. And if you are, that means we haven't done our job well. And I know that a lot of you have agonized over it. So that means there's a lot of work left to do. And so for the scores, we ask that you fill out column H only, raw score. It's only one column that you need to be putting numbers into. And the choices are either 1, 2, or 3. And so you look at the descriptions that are there on the left under resiliency metric. There is no resiliency and more resiliency. There are different descriptions for what this might mean. If you think you are somewhere in the middle, like a 2.5, well, sorry, you're gonna have to commit to something and either choose a 2 or a 3. If you wanna adjust the sheet to change that, go ahead. I won't know. But after you choose scores for everything, the scoring works by, you have your raw score, user entered score multiplied by the weight, that gives you a weighted score, and then it automatically sums it all up and gives you a nice number at the end. And then for the crises, they use the same weighted score, but there are some, for some of the questions, we decided to zero them out to show that the crisis has affected that question. So say for the total number of logical copies, the first one at the top, we asked the question, could any logical copies survive the crisis? And if there's a wildfire that burns down your data center, well then none of your copies are gonna survive because all your hard drives have gone kaput. So that score gets zeroed out. But if somebody was to retire and move upstate to the farm, you still have your data there. So there's no reason why that should be zeroed out. And hopefully, following up on that, you can read all the other questions about what has happened, and those questions make sense in how the crises apply. Finally, we have the last scorecard, the Data Impact and Recovery Scorecard. It's crisis invariant. So these questions are sort of, don't really matter if there is a crisis or not happening. Either you have a data management plan attached to a data set or you don't. A wildfire coming through and wiping out your data center is not going to affect whether or not a data management plan exists. It either does or it doesn't. These are a bunch of questions that we thought were important for the previous scorecard, the RRS, but we couldn't really quite figure out how to fit them in. And once we realized that they didn't really matter whether a crisis is happening or not, we decided to pull them out, put them in their own section, and then things made a lot more sense for the RRS and a little more sense for the DIRS, DIRS. And a lot of these are more public impact focused about, is there a data management plan for other people to look at? How is this affecting public access to data? And again, these questions were important, but we didn't know how to figure it out. They could definitely use some restructuring, some revisions. Quite happy to take feedback about that. Oh shoot, we never ran the Slido at the beginning. That was pretty bad of me. Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions now. We are supposed to have a Slido that I don't think I have any link to in there. So maybe what we'll do is we can I'll read off the different options, which are walking through, filling out the scorecards. If you haven't filled out the scorecards, there are at least 3 or 4 different people that have filled them out in person in here, my co-session organizers, and they would be quite happy to answer any questions and help you figure this out so that you can see for yourself how you think you do. If you've already done it, you can discuss the scores with yourself, with others, and maybe find an answer to some of these questions that you weren't sure how to do, or you're pretty assured of all your questions and you're looking for other repositories that could possibly sign an MOU with you or look for answers to shared problems that you have. And what you might like to do as a community, as a repository, what shape it should follow. And then finally, feedback and revisions on the scorecards themselves. If you have anything you'd like to tell to the cluster, to me, please, this is a chance to do so. And then, yeah, probably in August, well, no, that's like 2 weeks away. I don't think we'll be ready to digest that feedback quite yet. But in September, we will come around and we will look at the feedback we got and figure out what our next steps are to move forward. So yes, any questions? We do have a mic that I have not tried, so we can see if this works. Okay. See how it's going. Everyone. Polls. Oh. One moment. Let me open up my computer and set this up. So,
okay, there's polls and there's another question.
Yep. So, what did Alicia tell me? If you go to Slido, or I will put this in. Again, that should take you directly to the polls. Please move this window away from the shared application. Unfortunately, I can't do that. And then we can see what people are thinking. That is a good question.
If you go to Kiko Chat, it'll show you, you can either click on the agenda or Slido. If you click on Slido, it'll show you the questions.
Yeah, so while people are filling out the Slido, I'll start answering the questions. The first one, how does the scorecard relate to core trust seal? Are they apples and oranges, or should a core trust seal certificate mean a more resilient repo? Yeah, you can all have your own opinions on core trust seal. I won't get into that, but right now they have a public comment period open until August 15th, I believe, for 2025 or 2026 through 2028. So we do intend on submitting something to Core Trust Seal for them to consider. And I know that if we don't do it, other people have told me that they will. So it's better to get it directly from the horse's mouth than it is to allow other people to submit it and say you should think about these things. Is there some coordination with entities that can help increase their scores? Right now, the only entity that has really thought about this is the ESIP Sustainable Data Management Cluster. Most of the people who have worked on it here in this room, we are happy to help walk you through it, but we don't necessarily have clear instructions on how to help you improve your scores. I think some of it is self-obvious, like if you only have one copy of your data, make another copy of your data somewhere else. Maybe one of the things that could be worked on during this session is to develop a boilerplate contract, boilerplate MOU for that people can sign, which I do realize that would take much more time and more lawyers in the room than we have now to actually develop that. But if there is interest in doing that, that is something that could be done, and then people will know exactly, everybody will know exactly, say, how much data you're willing to share, how much data you're willing to take in, what your responsibilities and risks are. Other things like metadata, everybody has an opinion on metadata and ontologies and vocabularies you should be using. I'm not going to wade into that right now. But generally, if you have any questions about using the scorecards, we at the Sustainable Data Management Cluster are quite happy to talk about it and help you with it. Are repositories intending to gamify the scores? When you measure something, do you change its momentum? Yes. And so I would entirely expect that some people are going to make their numbers look more rosy. Other people may make their numbers look worse to try to get more funding from their funders about, oh, we need to have more hardware or more people or more training. I think this is just human behavior. I hope that by having enough people responding, that having enough scores that we can sort of statistically wash things out and find real signal in there somewhere. But with the current sample size of 3, that's very hard to do. Once a group fills out the scorecard, what's the next step? We have no idea. That's why we're here in this session right now. And hopefully by January 2026, we can tell you what the next steps should be after we've worked them out here and through the Sustainable Data Management Cluster meetings through the end of the year. Any questions from inside the room? No? Okay, so yeah, preference for breakout time seems to be very strongly discussing scores, what to do next. There are some people that would like to have walkthroughs of filling out the scorecards, some people that are willing to give us feedback, revisions on how we can improve it. Yeah, if I have no idea who submitted any of this, the votes or anything, but to me, it sounds like if we could maybe leave the primary room for discussing the scores, what to do next, and we can create a breakout for a guided walkthrough of filling out the scorecards. And maybe we'll just push the feedback and revisions to the side. You can reach out to us through other channels, and we would be happy to take that there. Anybody disagree? Okay. So for my co-organizers, would somebody like to handle the guided walkthroughs of filling out the RCS? If you are here in person, maybe we can just go out into the hall or something. I know that's not ideal, but that's something we could do. Or if all of the people that want to fill out the walkthroughs are online, somebody can go outside and find a chair and then do it over Zoom in the breakout room. And then we can have the main conversation in person here.
Yeah, could we get an idea who wants to do the walkthrough? I'm asking in the chat, but I'm not sure.
Maybe Boulevard, if you could just make one breakout room, if it's not made, yeah.
Hey, Joseph, please, question.
Yes. So the question is, what is your preference for the breakout time? We have roughly 30, 40 minutes for breakout time right now. And that should hopefully be enough time to fill out the, good? Okay. That should hopefully be enough time to fill out the scorecards and start a discussion of what to do next in 30 minutes. And then after that, we can move on to wrap up. Okay.
You're gonna stay out.
Yeah. Maybe go to more controls. Close this. Carolina, are you willing to go out and do that? Okay, so if you do want to have help in filling out the scorecards, Carolina will join the breakout room and she will do that in the breakout room. Otherwise, stay in the main room channel and we can have a discussion about what to do next. And we will take notes, if I can get out of Slido, maybe not. If I could find the slides. Maybe I didn't put it in here. But we'll throw up the notes in just a second and we can have a discussion and jot down notes in there. Okay. Okay, so we will just have this as a free-for-all. Is there something anyone wants to lead off with, or talking about scores, or what's next? Anyone online can feel free to chime in too. Yes, Carl.
I was curious, you alluded to, potential resistance or concerns about highlighting or capturing in the scoring what occurred to me as more qualitative characteristics of
Yes.
repositories in terms of, maybe it's the uniqueness of the collection, maybe it's the characteristics of the user community, where some may be more valued than others, or have greater political clout than others. And there are other characteristics that I think could probably fall into that category. And it sounds like those might, right now in the process, potentially not be captured or integrated into the scoring. So I guess I would pose the question in terms of what might we do in terms of developing a strategy to try to bring those in to the scoring and scores so that we can possibly mitigate some of those risks of, the only things that are important are the things that can be counted, and the only things that count are those that can be reported. And so I'm wondering how those conversations have already gone in the group that's developing it, and how we can continue that conversation.
There hasn't been much conversation around that. We've certainly addressed that it exists, but the work on the scorecards kind of happened between February to April, and then it stopped because we all have our day jobs to do as well. Actually flying the plane, so to speak. I think similar to the second scorecard, the DIRS, maybe there's something there that could be captured if we want to either integrate it into the DIRS or as something completely a third scorecard, maybe. If it needs to be combined together, maybe there's another tool that already exists, or it would be better standalone. I'm not sure at this moment how to do that. I am pretty firmly on the technical side, and so wading into the politics is something that I am not as well experienced in, I guess I would say at this point. But there's no time like the present to get involved.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the concern were things like,
Oh,
with
yes.
the current administration's emphasis on things like DEI and so I think a lot of the concern was related to, current emphasis on things like diversity, equity, and stuff like that, that some kinds of data are more at risk than others. And it's not entirely clear that the repositories in question are going to actually want to make that known outside of themselves, just because that might increase a risk. And so we were trying to avoid that. And I think that's one of the reasons why we know the thing has been downloaded like 1,200 times. And it's probably been used some goodly fraction of that. But we've only gotten 3 back. And I think that that's kind of emblematic of that, is that people really don't want to share that kind of information about, oh, here's our vulnerabilities, And I think that's a real issue. People don't want to share, hi, we're vulnerable here. That's not something a repository would like to share really necessarily. So I think we're going to have a hard time coming up with any real statistics about what the scores are in real repositories out there. And the question is without that information, I'm not sure how the sustainability group is going to be able to figure out, well, what improvements need to be made to the scorecard or anything like that.
And just to add on to that really quickly, I've had people privately say they think the score weights are should be changed, but without some feedback on how they should be changed to work for everybody, we have no idea. I came up with the weights by fiat. I just thought of them like, okay, this seems kind of right. I don't know. When I presented them to other people, they were like, I guess so. If you think it's good, then I think it's good.
So I guess I'm a guest in this group. I don't run a data center. I don't participate. I don't help operate a data center. But as a company, we use data from data centers all the time, and continuity of operations is sort of the way we think of these types of issues. Anyway, continuity of operations is expensive. So there's a financial management piece of this that, and it's really a question of acceptable risk as opposed to zero risk. As someone who makes use of, say, I don't want to pick on any specific data center, but the service level agreements for the data, we're used to like, oh, it's down for a few days for scheduled maintenance. And that's because we're not making real time use of the data, and that's fine, but there are data that require sort of higher levels of service. But these more traumatic events, like a funding crisis, my experience here is from participating on a user working group. So, that's a question of setting aside. Effectively, the host institution has to set aside financial reserves so they can do a graceful shutdown of some sort. And I didn't see the existence of sort of continuity of operations plans and financial backing to actually ensure that you can implement those in a period of crisis. And so that's just sort of a comment back from my experience of more of a strategic level than and then I do have a tactical thing, is that with the one data center I know of that has shut down, the metadata was all linked via DOIs, which pointed to their servers. So there's a pretty substantial cleanup of having to go through and redirect all those DOIs, which means actually finding new hostings. But the metadata tends to get broken first, because there are plans for the sort of bulk storage issues.
Yep. Tactically, yes, there's a lot we can do. I think for the first part, the strategic overview, financial succession planning and all of that, I think it might be in the DIRS. If it's not, it's probably in my notes to add it there at some point. But yeah, that's where we are right now. I think it was definitely created as a reaction to what was happening at the time. And so there was a lot less high-level planning of we need to hit all these categories. And this is where we are most vulnerable right now. And Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. Yeah, I was going to respond to Ruth's commentary about the sharing and unwillingness to share, and I agree with everything you said there. That is as an operator of a number of data facilities, you definitely don't want to expose things. That said, it still has a lot of utility internally for self-evaluation improvement. I filled it out for the Arctic Data Center, and it was super useful exercise to just go through all of the questions, and I could really see, even if we can't aggregate all the statistics, I think really improving the scorecard in a way that you identify the sets of issues that every repository should be thinking about and give them a structure in which to self-evaluate, that's a great start. Like, even if you don't get to do the statistical analysis across repositories. At some point, we might get to a point where maybe there's a trusted group, like the stewardship committee, where maybe 2 or 3 individuals, we might be able to create like a sensitive data set. Like, you can just treat it like a social science data set. Somebody gets to aggregate it, use it, but it gets anonymized and only aggregate statistics about the whole landscape get published. But I think that's a second step. I think the first step is making it super useful for people for self-evaluation. I think that's where I think we'd get the most benefit.
I'll second Matt's comment, and I think that probably provides an opportunity to explicitly highlight the value of the assessment as a self-assessment that can be used internally to help guide planning and development for repositories. And then, yes, having a future method for being able to aggregate and summarize to get snapshots of the broader repository community has significant value, but I think that's a follow-on capability. And along those lines, as you were mentioning the weightings, the weightings are probably going to vary from repository to repository based on their particular circumstances. And this was the case for a different assessment activity that I participated in at UNM. This was around our cyber infrastructure for research. And there's a standardized survey instrument that was produced for that did have a mechanism for then submitting and getting compiled into a larger aggregate. But one of the very useful characteristics of that was having the availability in the instrument to be able to include local weightings for the different elements in the instrument to be able to align it better with our institutional needs and priorities, to provide a more locally useful assessment that could guide our prioritization and planning.
That's a very good idea and exactly the sort of thing I was hoping to get out of this session today. So I think it's a success. Okay. Do you want to read it out?
Matthew, I think you can speak now.
Does that work?
Yes.
Does my camera work? Can you see me? Probably not.
We can hear
Hi,
you.
that's good enough. I'm Matthew Bedon with NOAA Integrated Ocean Observing System Office. Thank you so much for putting this session together. Thanks for inviting everybody to talk. I was just unmuting to comment in 100% agreement with the comments about this being used as some sort of an internal review process that would help repositories further build resilience. And that I was the one who was asking the questions about, like, what do you do next after you fill out the form? What I would like to see is, hey, I got a 1 in this and I got a 3 in this. I need to update something. How do I build a data management plan to update this score? Or how do I build a parent institutional continuity plan and have those resources actually linked within the form to give some more guidance as to, like, how can we start actually making some progress? And maybe that's something where you come into this sustainable data management cluster and you say, here's my repository crisis scorecard. Here are the results that I got. Where can I improve things? Where can I make it better? I think I'm just repeating everything that everybody else said, but I just wanted to emphasize that maybe including those resources as another tab in the spreadsheet would be helpful.
Yes, thank you, Matt. I agree wholeheartedly. Maybe something we can collect, even if it's not the whole scorecards, or just the names, email addresses of people that have filled it out. So we can say, if you filled it out and you have some questions, we have this mailing list of people that have filled it out, and maybe they have answers to similar things that you are encountering now. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe that's not. I should say that, just a minute, that we do intend to roadshow this. I do know that there has been some chatter about the scorecards internationally, and we are hoping to get some funding to attend International Data Week and AGU and shop it around to other people there. Brianna?
Yeah, thanks. And I apologize, I missed the start of the session, but I really love reading through the questions. And, formally coming from a NASA federal government, like data repository, I wish I could mandate everyone to fill this out, even if it's just a tool used internally. But I'm wondering in, the theme of resiliency, like how much of this can be filled out by an end user, or is there like a version of this? Because yes, there's some information like PIV, how a repo is handling PIV that only the repository is going to know. But in terms of, getting a directive of saying you need to just shut down, this data center, which is what is happening from a user perspective, all they're going to care about is, can I port this data quickly in some other database or preserve the structure of the metadata? So is there a version of this, I guess, that can be done without the data provider, like some questions that you can just ask as a community in terms of like, well, how are you interfacing with the data? Like what tools are you using and how would we replicate that if worst case scenario, something happened with a data center?
I think we could, just as an immediate reaction right now, you could ask your end users to fill it out for your repository right now. And in a few months, hopefully by January 2026, we could have a cut down form specifically for end users. I may not know what scores to assign for we have this many copies replicated at all these places. Like, they don't need to know that. They just need to know that they can get the data when they want to get it. Steve, did you have a question? No? Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Anyone online? Matt? Matt Jones.
Yeah, so I had another point about, like, as an internal tool for utility for evaluating how well a repository is doing, I found some of the questions to be fairly high level. So for example, there's a question that, does the repository have incomplete metadata, absolutely complete where all required and optional fields are present, or somewhere in between? That was the level of granularity. And of course, for repositories that have thousands of data sets, some of those data sets are going to score really high on that metric and others are going to score really low, and it's a management thing. Like, so I'd love to see it drilling into some of those things a bit more to sort of evaluate like where you are on that trajectory of the development of your metadata lifecycle. Metadata can be improved for individual data sets over time. Same thing with the next question on that, which was about fair metadata. It was, I found that like there probably is no repository that exists today that should ever have selected a class 3, tier 3 on either of those questions, because they're just too absolutist. As every single data set has an absolutely perfect fair score. No, like it's not going to happen, right? Fair is a subjective thing, and like, so, you know, I think it would be great to drill into some of those facets a bit more to figure out how we can provide guidance that gives people concrete feedback about how to improve. Like that would be useful for us, I think.
Yes, I agree. Especially for like the fair question, it's the canary in the coal mine. If anyone puts a 3 for that, I know not to trust their scores. But that's just something right now. The question could definitely be improved. Questions could definitely be improved. Steve.
In answer to Matt's question, I think the early days, the repository scorecard, obviously, as Joseph said earlier, was generated out of sense of fear and urgency to hit the broad categories, to almost as a self-assessment tool. Not that score can be exported. I think the natural evolution would lead to something that's more interactive, because there are repositories like the ones that you're responsible for, that have a high degree of heterogeneity. They have lots of different data sets and different stages with metadata. And then there's things like, what was IRIS? Remind me the name now. It's called. Well, it's part of something else. Anybody? Anyway, let's go with IRIS. So IRIS has seismic data, and it's very, it's all sort of in the same format, and it deals with one thing. Or a CCHDO that only has one program, basically that's WOS and then GoShip. And so you can answer almost for one data set across the entire holdings. So I would like to see in the coming months and years something that looks more like an interactive flowchart, where you start to describe your repository, and then it asks the appropriate questions for the type of repository that you're trying to evaluate.
I will say in the worksheet, one of the cut questions from the repository resilience scorecard to the pre-scorecard worksheet is like, how much data do you have? As a way to classify, like, where should your repository be? Some repositories might have only gigabytes or terabytes, but they provide intense curation and a lot of value add for their end users. Some repositories hold, for us in geosciences, satellite data, model output that are in the petabytes, and there may not be a lot of overlap in, say, the weightings or in how they look at things and how they think about things. For the smaller repositories, you could replicate it on 10 different hard drives and send them to 10 different countries, and that would be good enough. If you are daily moving over the latest copy of ECMWF, there's no way you could move all of your data out in 48 hours before a hurricane hits. So that there were some classification questions in the pre-worksheet that could maybe lead to helping develop that flowchart. And also recognizing that some repositories are bigger than others, handle other projects, multiple projects, and like, say, CCHDO with WOS, GoShip, there is a section for project. So the description we had was NSIDC, holding both NSIDC data, NASDAQ data, but also ELOCA. And so those are two wildly different projects. The score, nobody should be trying to score NSIDC with all of their projects at once. It should be NSIDC, ELOCA has one score, NSIDC, NASDAQ has a different score, so on and so forth. The same for the last stop repositories like NCEI. Like, if you're some projects could be very well curated, and other projects, they're constantly having people rotate through, and nobody ever gets around to cleaning things up. And so it shouldn't be scored, I think, as one monolith. Anyone else? I said I'd update the notes, but I'm not. Yes, Tom.
Since you brought up NSIDC, and it's not just NSIDC, but there's, again, I'm an end user, so I responded to the SSF, I think of it as SSMI, but SMIS, I guess. So DoD shut off your providing your basically your supply of data. And I gather from the notice without a whole lot of warning, and I didn't see sort of the supplier pipeline listed and self-assessment.
That's definitely a very good point, and something that we could add in the future. Something to chew on over the coming months. I would classify that in the crises as the scenario 3, cyber attack, denial of service, because suddenly you've lost access to something you used to have before. Granted that this recording is, or this session is being taped and recorded and put on YouTube, I cannot, not at liberty to say things. Yes. How did it go, Carolina?
Good. Yeah, we had a couple questions and a couple really good comments.
Sure.
Yeah, I didn't know the answer. So the red numbers in the scorecard, are those meant to be edited by the user? No, okay.
The red numbers in the crises sections are the ones that are zeroed out. So the example I gave was, do you have multiple copies of your data in your main data center? It doesn't matter if you have main copies, if you have 100 copies in your main data center in hard drives, solid state drives, tapes, paper lying around. It doesn't matter if a wildfire comes through and burns it all up. It doesn't matter if you've suddenly been told that all your funding is cut to stop work right away. Nobody can access it afterwards if all your servers are down or if they burnt to a crisp. So those red numbers are 0, but building on Carl's point for local weighting, not just in the base questions, but also local weighting possibly in the crisis scenarios where it's not just zeroed out, but maybe it's a fractional number or something else like that. That's something that we could explore. Other questions, feedback?
Yeah, we had some kind of discussion around the row 13 or 14 on the repository resilience scorecard on, how geographically separated does a copy need to be to count? Yeah, no, it was also the point that it brings up conversation, which in and of itself
Yeah.
is good, but I don't know.
At least, I don't remember the wording of the question right now, but at least initially the thought was, are they physically separated enough that a natural disaster or power grid failure or something that affects one data center will not affect the other data center? If you have, say, 2 data centers in the Bay Area, say San Jose and San Francisco, and a power grid failure takes out both of them, well, it doesn't matter if you have that geographic redundancy. It's functionally not geographic redundancy. If a giant storm comes through the Bay, they're both going to be hit. And so there's one for supposed to be like national inside the same nation state. So say, US East and US West, and there's supposed to be a corresponding question for international, and that may have eventually been moved to the DIRS section about having partners. Is there on line 14? Okay, yeah. So, let's say, what is a small country? Liechtenstein. It's a very small country, or Monaco or whatever. If you have a data center in there, it doesn't matter how far you are in Monaco, like it's all on the same power grid. So really the redundancy would be from having that data mirrored to Berlin or something, or Kiel, or Tokyo, I don't know.
So Ken brought up the question of, is it better to have 2 very geographically distinct copies rather than 3 that are kind of geographically distinct,
Well, 1 is none, 2 is 1, and 3 is 2. But also, I think this is a question, in a previous life, I used to be a system administrator and build servers and do all of these things. I have since pivoted away from that, and I think there are better answers that could be found in private industry. And, they have their own conferences and they talk about these things themselves. Maybe in the context more of budgets and how much can we get away with, or how much do we need to recommend so that we can get more money from people to spend on other things. But not all of these questions are things that we need to reinvent ourselves. We can ask these questions to other people who do this on a very technical level, and designing servers, figuring out where they're going to put their next data center, power needs, and all that. And that's something that we can offload to them. We don't have to reinvent everything. Matt.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying there is exactly why the question about weighting is a very personal one for each repository, because, okay, so you take a repository, they see they're going to get a 40% funding cut. So they know that they're going to basically lose a lot of their resources. Some repositories might prioritize access and continuity of operations. Others might prioritize, say, preservation, and make sure that they have those multiple copies, say another copy in Europe and another copy in Asia or something. And so those priorities are partly based on what their user communities need, what their own sort of foresight about what their funding situation might be in the future and things like that, right? So I think it's really hard to do a one-size-fits-all score that says this is the path you should take based on a certain set of weights. But it's still really useful to think about how many copies do you need to make a good distributed system? That's a great question that every repository should have to answer.
And that's why I don't want the weights to only be based on my gut feeling.
Hi, this is a question from Ken Casey online. Ken, do you want to unmute and ask your questions or give your comments?
Oh, yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, it's just what was being discussed there. I was just trying to put it in simpler terms. Are two facilities separated by 2,000 kilometers better than three that are within 100 kilometers of one another? Which is a very specific question. We're dealing with it now, as we're moving into the cloud. When you move your data when you move your data to one AWS region, you get three copies of it, one in each of at least three availability zones, sometimes more. But all of those AZs are within 100 kilometers of one another. So it's really generating these questions very specifically for us. Number one, can we afford it? And number two, is it really worth it from a risk perspective to pay for a whole nother copy of the data in another AWS region thousands of kilometers away? I'd love to, it'd be ideal, but I don't know if we can afford it or not. Our cost estimates suggest it would add about 10% to the overall storage costs, but that's a lot of money. So
Yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from there, and I guess right now I'm thinking about Adam Smith with the $1 billion climate disaster data set. We have more $1 billion plus natural disasters happening all over the world. With maybe you have data centers in LA, and if, as Brianna talked about earlier, a giant wildfire comes through and takes out 2 of your 3 data centers in LA, like, what does that mean? Do you still have data? I don't know. These are all very personal questions that I think, we can try to help each other find an answer for, but none of us can answer really for each other. Steve? Okay, go ahead, Ken.
yeah, and I guess that's why I was asking, because I do wonder if maybe through the groups like the reinsurance industry, and they're used to evaluating large scale risk, can actually answer this question a little bit more scientifically. Are 3 things that are 100 kilometers within 100 kilometers at more or less risk than 2 things that are 1,000 kilometers away? I would love it if somebody knew or saw a study done on this, or maybe there's somebody out there who has looked at these kinds of questions, and so that it's not a personal decision, it's actually more scientific.
I completely agree. I would imagine that maybe someone like AWS or Microsoft or whatnot has the statistics for their downtime at their data centers. But that's also intensely private and for profit, and we likely won't get that information anytime soon. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, we do have quite a bit of it in terms of their uptime reliability. They do publish those numbers, but we're talking about the kinds of events that haven't happened yet. They're once a century, like truly. We're talking about nuclear events or a massive tsunami. So that those kinds of things aren't really going to be in their uptime reliability numbers.
Yeah. Tom, I'll give you the last question since we're about 5 minutes.
So it's a follow-on to this. I think we need to be a little careful about thinking that distance is the solution, because if you have a monoculture in terms of technology, so you could have all your data in a zillion AWS instances scattered all over the world, but if the AWS technology has a problem, deliberate or not, then all of those go down, independent of how far away they are. So and 3 things 100 kilometers apart have very different risk profiles depending on, like you mentioned, if they're on independent power grids, different underlying geology. There's all kinds of differentiation. So you almost need a detailed engineering study to understand how to do that. It's not a rule of thumb.
And just as a follow-on to that, before we go into wrap up, there are nations that occasionally turn off the internet at their borders. If, say, all of US observations were not hooked up to GTS or whatever the successor is, we're no longer feeding into ECMWF or wherever else, what does that do to everyone else's models, forecasts? There are many ways we could riff off of this. But unfortunately, we have only 5 minutes left. So I'd like to thank everyone here for attending, in person, online. If they're, well, the slides are down. But if you have any questions, if this was useful, if you'd like to get in contact, please contact us at the ESIP Sustainable Data Management Cluster. There is an email somewhere, or on Slack, somebody drop a message in there, or you can contact me directly. Yes, thank you for coming, everyone. I found it to be a great discussion. I hope to work with a lot of you in the future around this topic. I hope to see you at one of the future sessions on data resiliency. Thank you.
And you're all invited to the Sustainable Data Management Cluster telecons that are held monthly.
You're all invited to the telecons that are held monthly. I think it's the first Monday of the month in the afternoon. I don't remember what the exact time is off the top of my head. I am the chair of the Sustainable Data Management Cluster because I was voluntold to do it. So if anyone else would like to actually volunteer to be the Sustainable Data Management Cluster, I am happy to pass it off to you after the end of the year. We will be focused on the scorecards, the RCS, through the end of the year at the very least. And then we will reassess where we are, maybe move on to something else as a primary project, or continue to work on it. We don't know. We're not there yet. Thank you, everyone.